My name is Albina, I am 34 years old, and as trite as it may sound, I truly believe that everything in life comes on time even if a little later than you would like. For almost 10 years now, I have been working as a customer service manager in a reputable company, not some startup with a coffee shop instead of an office, but a truly stable, reliable place where work is valued and paid for decently. This job allowed me to save up year after year, little by little, carefully, with modest dreams hidden between payment slips and work reports, and recently, to my surprise, I realized that I really managed to save up for what I had probably dreamed of since childhood, my own home. I lived too long in this gray, dull rented apartment with thin walls and other people's traces of life on the door frames. Every time I wrote a check for rent, I felt a growing sense of anger, like I was throwing money into a bottomless pit every month, and each time I realized more and more that I wanted something that was my own, something real, something that was rooted. After years of restricting myself and buying frugally, I had finally saved enough for a down payment, and the realization, almost physical, like holding a ticket to a new life, filled me with both dread and pride. I contacted a realtor, a woman named Sharon, who immediately inspired confidence in me with her straightforwardness and easy sternness. She quickly found a few houses that fit my budget, and we began scheduling viewings. But then there was a problem. My car, as trusty and old as my student loans, had broken down completely and was now sitting in a garage, surrounded by drips of oil and the tired looks of mechanics. Taxis and Ubers have temporarily become my wheels, and planning trips is a real challenge. My parents live nearby, just half an hour away, in a modest one-story house with appealing veranda, where everything smells of warmth, mint tea, and a little bit of melancholy. Dad, a strong, silent man, still works in construction. His hands are calloused, his voice is hoarse from dust and cigarettes. Mom is a school secretary, quiet and patient, always ready to listen, but rarely to support without conditions. They are good, honest people, but to be honest, they have always treated my younger brother Jake with special tenderness, which sometimes seemed offensive to me. Jake is 29. And despite the fact that he is charming and smiling, stability is clearly not his strong point. He goes through his work the way others go through the menu at a cafe. Either he leaves on his own or gets fired, and he always has an explanation, almost convincing, but already so familiar that I stopped listening to them. I decided that I would tell him about my plans on Sunday, over family dinner. It was a warm evening, the house smelled of fried chicken and vanilla cookies. I walked in and, as always, saw Jake stretched out on the couch, the remote in his hand, and the concentrated look of a man who is doing something important, watching TV. We sat down at the table, and before the conversation about the weather and work began to swirl, I took a deep breath, as if before jumping into cold water, and said, I have saved enough to buy a house. I am working with a realtor. We are already looking at options in my price range. Mom raised her eyebrows, and surprise mixed with pride flashed in her eyes. That's wonderful, dear, she said quietly. How much are you willing to spend? Dad added, always practical. About 600,000, I answered calmly. I have enough for a good down payment. At that moment, Jake, who had been almost lost in the TV screen, suddenly perked up, as if he had heard something that had broken his inner silence. He turned to me, his eyes lighting up. You know, I'm not working right now, he said with a new tone. I could help you out, take you around to look at houses. You said your car was in for repairs, right? I almost choked on my tea. This impulse was so unusual. Jake had never been known for taking initiative, especially when it came to helping others. That's very kind of you, I said slowly, trying to catch the catch. I mean, I know about houses and stuff. I can tell if something's wrong, well, so that you don't get cheated or something like that, he continued with unexpected confidence. I looked at him, trying to figure out if my younger brother, the perpetually unemployed and lover of excuses, had really decided to prove himself. Maybe something had really changed in him. Okay, I said, I have a meeting with a realtor tomorrow to look at a few houses. If you're serious about going, I'd love to join you. Sure, text me where and what time, I'll pick you up, he quickly replied, as if he were afraid I'd change my mind. And you know what? Jake actually kept his promise. The next day, he showed up on time, in his old Toyota, and we set off on our little adventure through the world of real estate. Over the next 2 weeks, we looked at least 15 houses, Sharon made appointments for us, and Jake drove me around, chatting, laughing, and, I must admit, being really helpful. He may not work long hours, but he has a keen eye. One house in particular stood out to me. From the outside it looked perfect, neat facade, manicured lawn, sunny porch, but as soon as we entered the bathroom, Jake frowned and said, "Albina, look here," he said with a businesslike seriousness I had never seen in him before, and there was something more than just interest in his voice, almost concern, almost responsibility. I walked closer, crouched down next to him, and he nodded toward the floor, where there seemed to be nothing unusual, but as he pointed, I noticed that the tiles around the base of the toilet seemed to be heaving, undulating, and the air was filled with that peculiar, pungent smell that is hard to describe but easy to recognize, the smell of damp and rotting, familiar to anyone who has ever dealt with leaky pipes. "See?" Jake said, "The tiles are warping, and that smell, there's definitely a plumbing problem here." I nodded silently, feeling a slight chill run down my spine, not from fear, but from the realization of how easy it would be to miss all this, how insidious houses with perfect facades could be. The realtor, adjusting her scarf a little nervously, began to mumble something about insignificant details, but Jake, not letting her finish, firmly said, "We need to look at the basement," and again I was surprised, not just by his pressure, but by how confidently he carried himself, as if he had done this before. We went down the creaky steps, and as soon as we inhaled, everything became clear. A heavy, musty smell hung in the air, traces of moisture dotted the basement walls, and suspicious stains darkened the floor. "Don't even think about it, Albina," he said, looking around. "Repairing this place will cost you so much that you'll curse this house later." And he was right, I thanked fate that he was nearby at that moment. We left and didn't even wait for an explanation from the realtor. This happened more than once. Jake, with the same attentiveness that I hadn't noticed in him before, found flaws that escaped the gaze of an ordinary buyer, an electrician who sparked behind the panel, foundations with cracks, barely noticeable but treacherously dangerous, or simply houses that he didn't trust, and, oddly enough, I began to trust his intuition. Sometimes he was overly picky, and I got irritated, feeling that we were dragging out this process too much, but then it turned out that it was his skepticism that saved me from mistakes that would have cost me not only money, but also peace of mind. It took 2 weeks of travel, conversations, disappointments, and small hopes before we found it, the house that seemed to be waiting for me, cozy, bright, in a green area with wide streets and friendly neighbors. It seemed to say, "This is your place," and, as if by magic, it fit my budget perfectly, exactly $600,000. The inspection went without surprises, no hidden defects, no unpleasant odors, no hints of mold or leaks. Everything was almost perfect. I felt excitement growing inside me, not anxious, but delighted, like a child who is finally allowed to choose a gift for himself. Sharon worked tirelessly, drawing up documents, negotiating with the bank, and a week later I was sitting in the office, holding the pen with which I signed my first mortgage. $600,000 is a huge amount of money, and I'd never taken on such a responsibility before, but in that moment it all felt right, mature, deserved. This house was mine. And, as it happens in life, when everything is going smoothly, a turn comes. The very next day after the deal was closed, my boss called me into his office. I walked in expecting another project or, at worst, a report discussion, but he got straight to the point. "Albina, I need you to go to Phoenix urgently, 2 weeks, a presentation for a very important client, and only you can handle it." I froze. In my mind I was still among the boxes, in my imagination arranging the furniture in the new living room, and now I had to fly to another state, but I couldn't refuse. This was an important chance, and I knew that if I said no, someone else would say yes. That evening, I called Jake. He answered right away. "Jake, I need a favor," I began, and he immediately tensed up. "I'm going away on a business trip for 2 weeks. Can you change the locks on the house? I'll feel better if it's done before I get back. I'll pick up the keys when I get back." "Sure, no problem," he replied without even thinking. "I'll do everything." I left the next day. Work had consumed me completely. Long days, presentations, negotiations, pressure. I barely had time to think about home. One day, on the 7th day of the trip, I called Jake. Hey, how are the locks? I asked, almost running, between meetings. Everything is ready, I changed them yesterday, your house is safe, he answered briefly. When I returned home 2 weeks later, I was exhausted, as if squeezed to the last drop, but the feeling of returning to the city, where I now had my own home, filled me with some new calm. I was in no hurry to move, I still had 2 months left on the lease of my old apartment. I decided that first I needed to paint the walls, maybe change the floors, feel the space. The next day I called Jake to pick up the keys. I couldn't wait to finally walk through the rooms, not as a guest, but as a hostess, to imagine where the sofa would be, where to hang old photos of my mother. Hi, Jake, I'm back, could you give me the keys to the house? There was a strange pause, long, wary. I even thought that the connection was broken, but then he spoke, slowly, with a note of something alien in his voice. Actually, I can't give you the keys right now. What do you mean? I asked, feeling how everything inside me sank. Well, I decided to live in your house for a while, with my new girlfriend, it's just you'll be in our way. I literally couldn't believe that I was hearing these words, my ears began to ring, as if a sharp gust of wind hit my head, and for a second everything around me lost clarity. I clutched the phone tighter and, trying to maintain some composure, said in a near whisper, "What are you even talking about, Jake? This is my house, I bought it, with my money, on my terms, I signed the papers, I pay the mortgage, this isn't some whim, this is a fact." But Jake, completely unfazed, as if he were talking about changing TV channels rather than breaking the law, replied with a slight grin in his voice, "Yeah, I understand, but I've already discussed this with Mom and Dad, they said I can stay there for a while, it's okay, don't get upset." I froze, not knowing whether to laugh or scream. Not only had he occupied my home, he had apparently decided that my parents' approval was more important than my right to property. For a second, I thought it was just a bad joke, maybe he'd gotten something mixed up, misunderstood, or was just playing a prank on me, like he had when he was a kid, hiding my diaries and swearing he'd found them at the neighbor's. "Jake, this is crazy, you need to give me the keys and leave my house immediately," I said, keeping my voice from shaking. But instead of apologizing or even explaining, he started laughing, quietly, with some kind of teenage superiority, as if I were hysterical and he was an adult. Reasonable person explaining to me how the world works. "Relax, Albina," he said, "everything is under control, I've already talked to my parents, it suits them." I was in such a state that I don't remember how the conversation ended. I just hung up without saying a word and immediately called a taxi. My car was still in the workshop, and, as luck would have it, the repair deadline had been extended again. I called a car, gave the driver the address, my new home, and rode the whole way in complete silence, feeling anger rising inside me, so thick, so caustic that it seemed to force the air out of my lungs. When the taxi stopped at the house, I didn't even wait for the car to drive away before I rushed to the door and started knocking. Not just knocking, pounding with all my might, as if my irritation could break through this new lock Jake had installed. "Jake, open the door immediately!" I screamed. I heard voices, footsteps, some rustling inside. I clearly understood that he was there, that they were there. I called his name over and over, until my voice was hoarse. After about 5 minutes, when I couldn't stand it anymore, I screamed, "If you don't open the door right now, I'm calling the police. This is my house, Jake, and you're in it illegally." There was a sudden silence inside, total silence, like someone had hit the mute button, and then the phone rang. I looked at the screen. Mom, of course, who else? I pressed accept, and heard her calm, almost gentle voice, "Albina, honey, what's going on?" Of course, she was already talking to Jake. I took a deep breath and, holding back tears and rage, said, "Mom, he won't let me into my own house. I asked him to change the locks because I trusted him, and he decided that he can live there now, with his new girlfriend." She sighed, and her voice became even softer, but in this softness there was a taut spring, the tone she always used when it was necessary to settle a situation. "Albina, calm down, come to us, we will discuss everything properly, this is a family matter, just don't call the police, please, just come." I no longer heard her. I was boiling like a kettle on the stove, about to blow the lid off. "I'll call the police if he doesn't open the door," I said harshly, but she suddenly interrupted me. In a sharp, almost alien voice, "Don't you dare do that, this is a family matter. If you call the police on your brother, we will stop talking to you." With these words, something in my head seemed to snap. I hung up the phone and, completely speechless, stared at the closed door of my own house, behind which someone was now living, as if I were an extra in my own life. I slammed my fist on the door, hard and furious, sending a sharp pain up my arm. Cursing everything in the world, I called another cab and drove to my parents' house. When I walked into their hallway, in this house full of family photos, crocheted doilies, and the smell of vanilla, I was no longer greeted with a smile. I didn't expect hugs, or tea, or words of comfort. I walked in like a hurricane, clenching my fists and barely containing my anger. "I want to know if you really told Jake he could live in my house," I demanded, looking straight at my mother. She and my father exchanged glances, and my mother nodded slowly. "Yes, it's true, but he didn't move in permanently, he just decided to stay there for a while. He has a girlfriend, and they need a place to be together." I stared at her as if she were a stranger. "Are you kidding me? I bought this house, I'm paying the mortgage, and he just decided to live there?" "Albina, it's harder for him than it is for you. You have to understand his situation," Mom said with that calmness that for some reason always made me even angrier. Dad sighed heavily, leaned forward, and, looking me straight in the eye, said, "You still have 2 months of rent, and Jake has nothing. He has nowhere to go. Let him live there for now. He'll find a job, save up some money, and move out. It's just for a couple of months. Until he gets back on his feet." I felt the walls starting to close in around me. I looked at them and didn't understand. Are these my parents? Are these the people who were supposed to be on my side? This is not normal, this shouldn't be happening. And when I opened my mouth to say again that I would call the police, Mom said firmly, harshly, like a judge passing sentence, "If you call the police on your brother, we will never talk to you again. This is a family matter, Albina, and we are solving it as a family," Dad said, and his voice had that special, soft, almost guilty warmth that he always used when he was trying to smooth things over. "Albina, my dear," he continued, as if my name could play the role of a sedative, "you have always been such a good sister, you always helped Jake when he needed it. We are simply asking you to do it again." Of course, guilt, how could I not have it? It slid inside me like an icy stream, right under my ribs. I looked at them both, at their tired but expectant faces, and suddenly I realized that they weren't just offering a compromise in words, they really believed that what was happening was normal, that their request was justified and reasonable. They really believed that I should let my unemployed adult brother live in the house I bought him, as long as I paid the mortgage every month, because, well, it's Jake. 2 months, I finally said, gritting my teeth so hard that my jaw clenched. Not a day longer. In 2 months, he should be out of the house. "Thank you, dear," Mom sighed with relief, and I saw her relax a little. "I knew you'd understand." I turned and left without saying goodbye, without looking back, without saying a single unnecessary word. Inside, everything was boiling, but on the outside, I maintained a fragile, dangerously trembling calm. Returning to my apartment, I sank onto the couch, and at that very moment a message appeared on the screen of my phone. "Thank you, sis. I really appreciate it." I looked at these words as if they were a phrase from a dream, something absurd, as if torn from someone else's life. I had a house, and I couldn't live in it because my brother needed it for his relationship. It seemed implausible, like a bad joke. I tried to get back into the work routine, returned home, drank tea, pretended to read, but my thoughts constantly returned to the house, to Jake, to his new girlfriend, whose face I didn't even know, but already hated by default, and after a few days, I realized I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't sit back and take it, I needed to see for myself. The car was finally picked up from the repair shop, and I drove off. When I knocked on the door, Jake answered with the biggest, most relaxed smile imaginable. "Hey, Albina, come in," he said, as if he were inviting me into his personal home, as if I were a guest. I walked in, and the first thing I saw was her, Jake's girlfriend, sprawled out on my couch, as if she'd bought it, as if she'd grown up within its walls. She looked to be in her mid-20s, her hair perfectly coiffed, her nails brightly painted, her clothes fashionable and probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Jake squared his shoulders, as if he were introducing someone very important. "This is Brianna, my girlfriend." She lazily looked up from her phone, looked me up and down, and said indifferently, "Oh, you're my sister, Jake told me. Well, next time you should call first." We were about to leave. I stared at her. Call? Me? My own house? Brianna, as if reading my thoughts, shrugged and added, "Yeah, whatever, but we live here with Jake now, so if you want to come over, you'd better let us know in advance. We'd like our privacy respected." I felt my blood pressure rise, my insides pulsing with barely contained anger. "Sorry," I said slowly, almost breathing out the words, "but this is my privacy, this is my home, I pay for it." "Look," Brianna said with lazy impudence, not even looking up from the screen, "I don't care whose name is on the paperwork, we live here, and we make the rules." I was almost out of control when Jake suddenly stepped toward me and took my hand. "Albina, can we talk for a minute? Can we talk in the kitchen?" He pulled me away from the couch, where Brianna was already scrolling through her phone again. And as soon as we turned the corner, he whispered, "Please don't start fighting with her, she's just protecting our space." "Our space?" "Jake, this is my home," I said quietly, but with such fury in my voice that I scared myself. I know," he nodded quickly, "just calm down, okay? This is temporary." I took a deep breath, trying not to yell, not to get even angrier than I already was. "Okay, but I need a spare set of keys, and no parties, Jake, I mean it." Sure, no problem," he said, walking over to the drawer and pulling out a set of keys. "Here, take them." I took the keys, turned, and walked past Brianna without saying a word. She didn't even glance my way. It had been a month since Jake and his new life had moved into my house. I worked like my sanity depended on it, trying to block the images from my mind, but the feeling of someone living in your home, using your things, breathing your air, while you sent a check to the bank every month, it was driving me crazy. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and called him. I needed to hear his voice, to understand what was going on, to at least pretend that I had some control over the situation. I dialed the number, and when he picked up, I tried to sound as calm as I could. "Hey, Jake, how's the job search going? Have you found anything yet?" His voice immediately took on that familiar awkwardness, the hesitation he always used when he didn't want to tell the truth. "Yeah, I am, it's just really tough right now, you know, but I'm working on it." I clutched the phone tighter than I should have and, holding back my irritation, reminded him, "We agreed on 2 months, Jake, this isn't a request, this is our clear agreement, I promise." He replied, "I just need a little more time to find the right opportunity." I didn't say a word in response. I simply hung up and sat down on the couch, feeling a chill run down my spine from that same, almost forgotten, helpless melancholy. A week passed. I was sitting at work when the phone rang. The number was familiar. Mike, one of Jake's friends, a guy I had known practically since high school. I answered, reservedly, with slight surprise. "Hi, Mike, is everything okay?" He responded cheerfully, "Albina. Hi. Are you coming to Jake's housewarming party?" I was taken aback. "What housewarming party?" I asked, feeling something unpleasant begin to twist in my stomach. "Oh, right. He told me he bought a house, he's throwing a housewarming party tomorrow at 7 to celebrate. I thought you knew." I almost dropped the phone, my blood ran cold. "I'm sorry, Mike. What exactly did he tell you?" My voice was quiet, but dangerous. Mike, a little embarrassed, muttered, "He said he'd been saving for years and finally bought the house of his dreams, and that you helped him with the paperwork or the down payment, or something. That was really sweet of you." I was silent, trying to collect my thoughts, my words, my breath. Jake hadn't just moved into my house, he'd told everyone he'd bought it. "When did you say the party was?" I managed to get out. "Tomorrow, at 7, be sure to come, he'll be happy." "I'll come," I said dully and hung up. The next evening, I pulled up to my house, and saw that it had transformed from a quiet, cozy place into a noisy arena. Music was blaring from the windows, the front was lit up with fairy lights, and cars were parked all along the street. People were filling the porch, laughing, smoking, taking pictures on the porch like it was an Airbnb rented for the weekend. I sighed, pulled out my spare key, and wasted no time walking inside. The house was packed, the kitchen, the living room, the hallway, there were people everywhere. The music was pounding in my ears. Someone had spilled something sticky on my carpet. bottles were on my coffee table, someone was smoking by the windows. No one even noticed me coming in, the lady of the house had become a shadow. I pushed through the crowd, looking for Jake, and found him by the kitchen. He was the center of attention, waving his arms, holding a beer in one, telling a story, shouting over the music. "Honestly, I saved up for this place for 5 years," he shouted proudly. "My sister helped a little with the paperwork, but it's all mine." The crowd laughed. He paused and, already in a half-whisper, added, "Poor Albina still lives in her rented shack, and here I am, in a fancy house." "Loser," I coughed, loudly, on purpose, and at that moment, the whole room, as if someone had pressed pause, turned around. The people who had been laughing a second ago froze. Many knew me. Jake's face instantly turned red, and he immediately came up to me, took my hand and pulled me aside, into the hallway, away from prying ears. "Listen, I can explain everything," he began, almost whispering. "You said I was a loser. And you live in a fancy house?" I interrupted, "No. That's not what I meant. It's just, some of those guys were potential business partners. I wanted to impress, I needed to look successful." I looked at him, not recognizing him. He hadn't just lied, he had built an entire fictional life around himself, using my labor, my money, my dream. "This is all temporary," he added, his tone pleading. "Please don't tell them the truth, it will ruin everything." I turned to go back into the living room, but he grabbed my arm again. "Albina, please don't. Throw everyone out, I beg you." I pulled my hand away. "It's time to stop lying, Jake," I said loudly, so that the nearest people could hear. He froze, then shouted, "If you tell them the truth now, I'll call Mom and Dad, and they'll take my side." Like always, I stopped, looking at Jake, and suddenly felt the air around me thicken, as if the walls of this house, so recently so bright and desirable, were beginning to close in, slowly, inexorably, hanging over my head. There was something different in his voice, not the usual carefree chuckle or lazy justification, but something hard, harsh, even angry, as if some dark determination had been brewing inside him all this time, and now it had burst forth. He looked at me with a smile that held no trace of apology. "I've already talked to them," he said almost with pleasure. "They think this house is perfect for me, Mom. She wants you to just give it to me, for good." It took me a moment to process what he said. I heard the words, but the meaning was hazy. "What are you even talking about?" I whispered. He shrugged, as if he were asking about something as mundane as who was going to wash the dishes. "She thinks you should transfer the title to me. You're older, you have a little brother to take care of, I have Brianna now, and we want to get married, we need a home." The world lurched slightly, as if the ground beneath my feet had shaken. "You can't be serious, this is a joke, right?" I asked, but he looked at me calmly, with complete confidence in his own rightness. "I'm dead serious. This house is perfect for us, you can find another place." I didn't answer, I just turned around and walked out the same door I'd come in through an hour ago, without saying goodbye to anyone. In the car, my hands shaking, I dialed the number. My mom answered almost immediately. "Mom, tell me, did you really tell Jake that I should give him my house?" I asked, barely holding back tears. "Yeah," she answered calmly, without shame, without doubt. "You've already built a career, you have a job, and Jake needs help getting started. He has a girlfriend, he wants to get married." I almost choked. "Who's going to pay the mortgage?" I asked, knowing what I was going to hear, but still not believing it. "You, of course," she said. "Jake doesn't have a stable income yet." I froze. Everything became crystal clear. "So Jake lives in my house, I pay the mortgage, and he gets the house forever?" I asked, and in the silence that hung on the other end, her voice finally rang out. "I understand." I hung up. Back at my apartment, I wordlessly took my suitcase out of the closet and started packing. I'd had enough, this absurdity had to end. The next morning, I called work, took the day off, citing feeling unwell, and drove to my house, my damn house. I parked across the street, staying in my car and watching the house, my heart pounding in my throat. An hour later, Jake and Brianna came out, laughing, carefree, coffee in hand, and got into his car. Probably going to lunch or shopping, with money he'd never earned. As soon as they disappeared around the corner, I pulled up to the house. The locksmith was already waiting for me. I'd called ahead and explained everything. "Do you want all the locks changed?" he asked. I looked at the front door, at the walls where I had invested not only money but hope, and with clear confidence I said, every single one. While he worked, I went to the car and began hauling the boxes I had packed the day before, clothes, personal items, essentials, everything so that I could finally live in my own home again. When I got upstairs, I gathered up Jake and Brianna's things, his clothes, her toiletries, some electronics, a bunch of junk scattered in different corners, and stuffed them into black garbage bags without sorting them. One by one, I carried them out onto the front lawn. When the locksmith was finished, I paid him, thanked him, closed the door, and turned the key in the lock, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe normally. I was home, in my home. Around 6 o'clock I heard a car pull up, then I heard voices, sharp and tense. Jake and Brianna were back. What the hell? Jake screamed, why is our stuff on the lawn? They started pounding on the door, ringing the doorbell over and over. I went upstairs and opened the second-story window. Get off my property or I'll call the police, I screamed. Jake looked up. Albina. What did you do? Why did you throw our stuff out? I looked at him, at his surprised, hurt face, and for the first time in my life I felt no guilt or doubt, because this is my house, and you don't live here anymore. He immediately pulled out his phone and called my mother. I could hear him screaming into the receiver, complaining as if he had been kicked out of his own home like a child. 2 minutes later my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was strained and hoarse with anger. Albina. It's Marie, get your brother home right now. I stared out the window. No, Mom, I won't let him come home. If you don't, we'll throw you out. We'll never talk to you again. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, as if it were slamming against my ribs. Then I took a deep breath, calmly, firmly. Then I guess, that's it, I said, and hung up. Jake and Brianna continued to stand on the lawn in front of the house and shout for another 15 minutes, as if the volume of their outrage could convince me, as if the very fact that they were offended made them right. I stood by the window, watching silently, not saying a word, not opening the door, when Jake, completely losing his temper, shouted, "You're going to regret this, Albina." Something inside me seemed to snap, not fear, no, but the realization that this wasn't my brother, not my relative, not my significant other, but just a grown man trying to snatch from me what was rightfully mine. Then they left, angrily stomping down the sidewalk, throwing bags into the car and slamming the doors as if they were going to dent my house, and I stood there and watched until they were out of sight. After they left, I sat on the couch and called my boss. I didn't go into details. I said that an unforeseen family emergency had come up and that I needed to work from home for a few weeks. It wasn't a lie, not really. After all, everything that was happening wasn't just disturbing the peace, it was tearing my daily life apart. Luckily, he was understanding, saying it wasn't a problem and that I could continue working remotely for as long as I needed. I thanked him and then went upstairs to the bedroom, which I immediately converted into an office. I put my laptop in there, an old wooden desk from my college days, a lamp with a soft, warm light, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged. It felt strange and a little unfamiliar to wake up not in a rented apartment, where every spot on the wall belonged to someone else's life, but in my own home, where every shelf, every curtain, even the creak of the stairs belonged to me. With this feeling came relief, a deep, slow one, the kind that makes you want to exhale after a long run. I no longer had to pay rent to live in someone else's place while my house was host to parties and people told me I was a loser. I resolved not to leave the house unattended, even for a short time. I ordered everything online, groceries, household items, even fresh flowers for the kitchen, because I knew Jake. I knew him well enough to know he wouldn't give up that easily. The first few days passed quietly. I began to hope, maybe he finally realized it was over, maybe he accepted it like an adult. I was naive. On Thursday, in the middle of the day, as I sat at the computer, processing reports, I suddenly heard a strange sound, like scratching. It was coming from below, from the front door. I listened, froze. The sound was distinct, as if someone was inserting something into the lock and carefully turning it. My heart started beating faster. I slowly walked to the window, pulled back the corner of the curtain and looked down, and there was Jake. He was squatting by my front door, and something was shining in his hands, a set of master keys, no doubt. He was fiddling with the lock, completely focused, as if he had every right to do so. I nearly choked on anger and fear. I pressed the call button on the phone with a cold finger. 911, how can we help? A voice said, someone is trying to break into my house, right now, they're breaking the lock. it's my brother. But he doesn't live here and has no right to be on the property. I gave him the address, and the dispatcher said officers were on their way. I remained at the window, watching as Jake continued to fiddle with the lock, unaware that his attempt would end in handcuffs. The police arrived quickly. Only 5 minutes later, 2 officers got out of the car and headed for the door, where Jake, still unaware of them, continued to fiddle. "Excuse me, sir, what are you doing?" one of them asked. Jake winced and looked up. "Oh, hello, officers, this is my house. I just accidentally locked myself out." I immediately opened the door, stepped out onto the porch, and looked the officer straight in the eye and said, "Gentlemen, I own this house. This man is my brother, and he does not live here. He is trying to pick the lock to get in." Jake stood up and shouted, "Albina, tell them I live here. Tell them the truth." I turned to him and said with icy calm, "No, Jake, you do not live here. This is my house. I want him under arrest for attempted trespassing." One of the officers looked at the tools in his hands. "Sir, do you have permission to be on this property?" Jake was starting to lose his temper. "You can't do this to me. I'm your brother. I'm family," he screamed, but the officer was already pulling out handcuffs. "Sir, you're under arrest for attempted burglary and trespassing." I stood there motionless, watching him being led to the car while he screamed at me that I would regret betraying my family. I just watched until they disappeared around the corner. 2 hours later, the phone rang. Mom, I knew what she was going to say, but I answered anyway. She sounded furious, the voice of a mother who made no attempt to hide who she had chosen. "How dare you arrest your own brother? Call me right now and tell them to let him go," she screamed. "No, Mom, he tried to break into my house. This isn't just a family matter anymore, it's a crime." "That's ridiculous. He's an adult." "Yes, but he's your brother. This is your personal matter." "No, Mom, I'm not going to call anyone, and I'm not going to apologize for defending myself." She was silent for a second, then hung up angrily. A couple of days later, when the sharp edges of the recent drama were beginning to recede into the shadows of everyday concerns, I heard from my cousin that Jake had already been released. Mom and Dad had posted bail for him. This news did not surprise me, or make me angry, or, strangely enough, even particularly disappointed, only fatigue and a quiet confirmation of what I had long known. In this family, it was always clear who was on whose side. 3 months had passed since then. I hadn't spoken to Jake or my parents, and, to be honest, I hadn't for a minute felt like I missed it. I heard about them through other relatives, like strangers in small family newspapers. "Jake and Brianna were living with my parents," they said, and it turned out Mom and Dad were telling anyone who would listen how cruel and ungrateful I was and how I'd abandoned my family for some house I didn't really want. My cousin Sarah had called me last week. We were as close as you could be in a big family, and she always tried to stay out of the drama. "Your mother's telling everyone that you stole the house from Jake," she said, a note of apology in her voice. "She says you tricked him into thinking it was his." I laughed, dryly, without humor. "That's crazy," I said, "but sadly, it's not surprising." Sarah sighed. "Your dad seems confused by the whole situation, but he's keeping quiet, as always, and Jake's been telling everyone that you arrested him for no reason, out of the blue." I shook my head, holding the phone to my ear. "What about Brianna?" I asked, more out of curiosity than genuine interest. "She left him a month ago," Sarah said. "They say life with your parents wasn't as glamorous as she'd hoped for." I almost felt sorry for him, almost. "But are you okay?" she asked softly. I smiled, the first time in a long time that there was real warmth. "You know, I feel better than I have in years. I miss my family, sure, sometimes. Especially the times when everything seemed simple, when Mom would call just because, and not to manipulate. But I don't miss the drama. I don't miss the guilt that sat on my shoulders like an old, heavy coat. I don't miss the role of the responsible adult who always had to sacrifice his own desires for the sake of the common good." Since all this happened, I have been living in my own house, a real house, not just 4 walls. I have repainted the walls in colors that I have long liked, but which I was afraid to choose because they seemed too bright or impractical. I have chosen furniture that makes me happy, even if it means that there is a flower-shaped chair in my living room and a copper lamp in the kitchen that reminds me of summer evenings at my grandmother's house. I have planted a garden, a small one, but every sprout there was my decision, and in these seemingly small things, I have felt the taste of freedom for the first time, because all this is mine, my life, my home, my walls. Sometimes, of course, the shadow catches up, when a holiday passes and the phone is silent, when I hear about someone's family dinners or calls from my mother, and my heart painfully squeezes, but these are rare moments, and I have learned to live with them, because the rest of the time, those simple, warm, real moments, I feel good, really good. My friends were shocked when I told them everything that happened. Some sat with their mouths open, unable to believe that my parents would actually take Jake's side. Others squeezed my hand and told me they were proud of me. You did what most people wouldn't have the courage to do, I heard one day, and that fixed something inside me, stitched it up. Work started to go uphill. Without the constant stress and manipulation from my family, I became calmer, more focused. My boss even mentioned an upcoming promotion, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I deserved to succeed. Last month, while I was standing at the fruit counter at my local supermarket, I accidentally bumped into Jake. It was awkward, so awkward that for a second I froze, as if time had stopped. He saw me first, hesitated, then, finally plucking up his courage, came up to me. "Hey, Albina," he said quietly, "listen. I know this all started because of the house situation. Maybe we could talk? Solve it like adults?" I looked at him, straight in the eyes. "There's nothing to solve, Jake. You tried to steal my house from me." He looked away, muttered, "It wasn't like that." But I interrupted him. "That's exactly how it was." He seemed to want to say something else, but I had already turned and walked away. I was done with his excuses, with his manipulations, with him. Sometimes people ask me if I regret breaking up with my family. The answer is no. I regret that it came to this. I regret that they chose the path where I was superfluous, but I don't regret my choice, because that choice saved me. They showed me who they really are, what they think of me. Jake thought he could just take my house. My parents thought I should let him, and that's where I learned the most important thing. Family ties are no guarantee of good intentions. Sometimes the closest people can hurt the most, but I did it. I'm standing, I'm alive, in my own home, on my own terms, and you know what? That's enough for me.